Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax.
The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of gold and crimson in its wake as we pulled into the parking lot of a roadside diner. It was one of those places that seemed stuck in time, with its neon sign flickering erratically and a jukebox playing soft, indistinct tunes. My wife, Laura, sighed in relief as we parked. Our two kids, Ellie, 10, and Sam, 6, squirming in the back seat after hours of driving. "We'll grab something quick," I said, stepping out of the car. Ellie tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, it feels weird here," she whispered, her big eyes darting around the nearly empty lot. "It's just late, honey. You're tired." I reassured her, though I felt it too. A strange, heavy air that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Inside, the diner was nearly deserted. A waitress leaned against the counter, lazily flipping through a magazine. A lone man sat in a booth at the back, his face obscured by shadows. Ellie clung to Laura's hand as we settled into a booth by the window. We were midway through ordering when Ellie froze, her gaze fixed on the parking lot. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "There's someone in the car." I glanced outside. The car was locked, the interior dark. "There's no one there, Ellie," I said, my stomach tightening. "Yes, there is," she insisted, her voice flat. "He's sitting in the back seat, smiling at me." Before I could respond, Laura nudged me. "Just check. It'll ease her mind." The car was empty. I double-checked the locks and scanned the lot, but it was as deserted as before. When I returned to the diner, Ellie was gone. The next hours were a blur of panic and despair. The waitress claimed she hadn't seen anyone take Ellie, and the old man in the back booth had disappeared. The police arrived, asking the usual questions and searching the area. Their skepticism was clear. They thought she had wandered off. But I knew better. Ellie wouldn't have left on her own. Laura was inconsolable. Sam clung to her, crying softly. I couldn't stop replaying Ellie's words. "He's sitting in the back seat, smiling at me." Who was he? Where had she gone? I began returning to the diner every night. Laura begged me to stop, saying it wasn't helping, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were there. On the 5th night, I saw her. Ellie was sitting in the same booth where the old man had been. She was smiling, her eyes wide and unblinking. Behind her stood the man, a tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me. I bolted inside, but they were gone. After that, strange things began happening. I started waking up to find Ellie's belongings moved or her voice faintly calling my name in the dead of night. Laura thought I was losing my mind, and maybe I was, but then I found the note. It was scrawled on the fogged-up bathroom mirror. "I love Dad, Ellie. 760. The number haunted me, felt like a code, a clue. Desperate, I turned to a local numerologist, Linda, whom Laura had consulted before. Linda claimed Ellie was connected to an Appalachian ley line, a powerful energy path linked to ancient forces. "She's a watcher," Linda explained, her tone grave. "She sees what others cannot. The diner sits on a convergence point, a liminal space where our world overlaps with another." I scoffed, but deep down, I felt the truth in her words. Ellie's disappearance wasn't ordinary. She was taken by something beyond comprehension. I returned to the diner, now forbidden by a court order after an altercation with the staff. I sat in my car, staring at its neon glow, when the air around me grew icy. The lights flickered, and I saw them again. Ellie and the man. She waved, her smile eerily calm. This time, I didn't run inside. Instead, I followed a hunch and drove to a nearby library to research the area. What I found chilled me to the bone. The diner had a history of disappearances dating back decades. Locals whispered about an unseen road that opened under certain conditions, leading to a place called the Valley of Echoes. Survivors described it as a distorted mirror of our world, filled with shadowy figures and a crushing sense of dread. Determined to save Ellie, I returned to the diner armed with everything I'd learned. At precisely 3:33 a.m., I stepped out of my car. The world around me seemed to shift, the stars above growing dim. The diner's neon sign buzzed louder, its flickering light now pulsating rhythmically. I opened the diner door to find it transformed. The walls were cracked, oozing a black, tar-like substance. The air was heavy with whispers, unintelligible but insistent. In the back booth, Ellie sat alone, her face pale but her eyes shining with recognition. "Ellie," I called, rushing to her. She looked up, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. The man appeared behind her, his face contorted into a grotesque grin. "You can't take her," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "She belongs to the valley now." I lunged at the man, but my hands passed through him as if he were smoke. Ellie screamed, her voice breaking through the whispers. The diner began to collapse, the walls folding inward as if the building were alive. "Ellie, run!" I shouted, grabbing her hand. We sprinted for the door, the floor beneath us cracking and splintering. Just as we reached the exit, the man lunged, his shadowy form enveloping us. For a moment, I felt nothing but cold and despair. Then we were outside, gasping for air under the pale light of dawn. The diner was gone, replaced by an empty lot. Ellie was safe, but she was changed. She spoke little of what had happened, only saying, "They watch, Dad. They always watch." The number 760 still haunted her, appearing in her drawings and whispered in her sleep. We moved away, trying to rebuild our lives. But sometimes, late at night, I catch Ellie staring out the window, her expression distant. And in those moments, I swear I can see the diner's neon glow reflected in her eyes. The watching never ends. Weeks later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of the diner, its neon sign glowing brightly. Scrawled on the back were the words, "The valley is patient. It waits for its watchers." It was supposed to be a shortcut. A storm rolled in as Mark and Dana drove down a winding back road in the Appalachian Mountains. They had been on their way to a vacation cabin with their 9-year-old daughter, Sophie. The GPS lost its signal hours ago, but Mark insisted they'd find their way. He was never one to admit when they were lost. The rain hammered against the windshield, making visibility almost non-existent. Dana glanced at Sophie in the back seat. The girl was asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, her breath fogging up the window. "You should have taken the main highway," Dana muttered. Mark tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "This road cuts through. It'll save us at least an hour." The headlights illuminated a wooden sign ahead, its lettering barely visible through the downpour. "Ashridge Hollow, 2 miles. "Never heard of it," Dana said. Mark shrugged. "Probably a tiny mountain town. If nothing else, we can ask for directions." As they turned the bend, a house appeared on the side of the road, its silhouette framed by gnarled trees. The structure was old, its windows shattered, the porch sagging under the weight of decay. Yet, inexplicably, a faint golden light glowed from inside. "What the hell is that?" Dana asked, her voice tight. Mark slowed the car. "Looks abandoned, but someone's home. No way are we stopping there." Before they could decide, Sophie stirred in the back seat. Her voice was small and groggy. "It's calling me." Mark and Dana exchanged a glance. "What's calling you?" Dana asked. Sophie's eyes were wide open now, her gaze fixed on the house. "It knows my name." Against Dana's protests, Mark pulled the car over. The rain eased into a steady drizzle as they stepped outside. Sophie held Dana's hand, staring at the house with an unsettling calm. Mark knocked on the door. The wood creaked under his fist, but no one answered. "It's empty," he said, turning back. Before he could finish, the door slowly swung open, revealing a dimly lit hallway lined with mirrors. Each mirror reflected their faces, but something was off, subtle, almost imperceptible differences. In one, Sophie looked older, her eyes hollow and sunken. In another, Dana wasn't holding Sophie's hand. "We shouldn't go in," Dana said, pulling Sophie back. "This place is wrong." But Sophie stepped forward, her stuffed rabbit dangling from her hand. "I have to," she said, her voice distant. Mark hesitated, torn between his wife's fear and his daughter's strange resolve. Against his better judgment, he followed Sophie into the house. The air inside was thick, humming with an unnatural energy. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, each mirror reflecting warped versions of reality. Dana refused to let go of Sophie, her grip tightening with every step. "Let's leave," Dana urged. "Sophie, we're going now." But Sophie stopped in front of a mirror. Her reflection was smiling, though her real face was blank. The reflection raised a hand and waved. Sophie didn't move. "Sophie, don't..." Dana started, but the girl touched the glass. The mirror rippled like water. Sophie's reflection grabbed her wrist and pulled her through. "No!" Dana screamed, pounding on the glass. It was solid now, cold and unyielding. Sophie was gone. Mark dragged Dana away from the mirror, his face pale. "She has to still be here," he said, his voice shaking. "We'll find her." As they moved deeper into the house, the mirrors began to change. Instead of reflections, they showed scenes. Distorted, nightmarish visions of Sophie wandering through endless hallways. In one, she was crying, calling for help. In another, she was sitting in a dark corner, whispering to someone unseen. Mark tried to break the glass, but the mirrors wouldn't shatter. Instead, they seemed to mock him, showing twisted versions of himself. Angry, desperate, broken. "She's trapped," Dana whispered, tears streaming down her face. But where? At the end of the hallway, they found a grand room filled with mirrors of all shapes and sizes. In the center stood a man, if he could be called that. His body was thin, almost skeletal, and his skin had the sheen of polished glass. His eyes reflected endless corridors, like looking into infinity. "Welcome," the man said, his voice like shards of breaking glass. "You've come for the girl. Where is she?" Mark demanded, stepping forward. The man tilted his head, his mouth curling into a smile. "She belongs to the house now. She chose to see. She's just a child," Dana shouted. "Give her back." The man gestured to the mirrors around him. Each one flickered to life, showing Sophie in different scenarios. Laughing, crying, screaming. "She is everywhere and nowhere. To take her, you must choose the right one." Dana looked at Mark, her face stricken. "What if we choose wrong?" The man chuckled, a sound that made their ears ache. "Then she remains, forever." Mark and Dana frantically studied the mirrors, searching for a clue. One showed Sophie playing with her stuffed rabbit. Another showed her running, her face contorted in fear. In yet another, she sat in a dimly lit room, staring blankly at the floor. "She's scared," Dana said, her voice trembling. "We have to choose the one where she's scared. That's the real her." "No," Mark argued. "That's what it wants us to think. The real Sophie is calm, waiting for us." They turned to the keeper, whose grin widened. "Time is running out," he said. "Choose wisely." Mark clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He reached for the mirror showing Sophie playing with her rabbit. Dana screamed, "No, Mark, don't." Before she could stop him, Mark touched the glass. The mirror shattered, and the room plunged into darkness. When the light returned, they were standing outside the house. The storm had passed, and the road was silent, but Sophie was gone. "Where is she?" Dana cried, shaking Mark. "Where's our daughter?" Mark turned to the house, but it was no longer there. In its place was an empty field, overgrown with weeds. He fell to his knees, his face buried in his hands. From the corner of her eye, Dana saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods. It was Sophie, or something that looked like her. Her face was pale, her eyes reflecting the same endless corridors they had seen in the mirrors. "Sophie," Dana whispered, stepping toward her. The girl smiled, a cold, hollow smile, and turned, disappearing into the trees. Mark and Dana never found Sophie. They reported her disappearance to the police, but no one believed their story. Over time, they grew distant, the weight of their loss driving them apart. Mark became obsessed with finding the house, combing through old maps and local legends. He discovered that Ashridge Hollow had vanished from records decades ago, swallowed by the forest after a series of mysterious disappearances. Dana tried to move on, but she often felt Sophie's presence, especially in front of mirrors. Sometimes, she would catch glimpses of her daughter's reflection, standing just out of reach, her eyes filled with silent pleas. One night, unable to bear it anymore, Dana covered every mirror in the house. But when she woke the next morning, the covers were gone. Written on the bathroom mirror in small, childlike handwriting was a single message. "I'm still here, Mommy. Come find me." The endless hunt years later, a group of hikers reported seeing a strange house deep in the Appalachian woods. Its windows gleamed like mirrors, reflecting something other than the surrounding forest. Inside, they claimed to hear a child's laughter, faint and distant. None of them dared to go inside, and the house waits, as it always has, for the next traveler to lose their way. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, just 4 friends reconnecting after years apart. Jenny, Mike, Sarah, and Ethan had rented a remote cabin in Black Hollow, nestled deep in the Pacific Northwest woods. The place was cheap, but its isolation was perfect for a group eager to escape the noise of their everyday lives. The cabin was rustic, with creaky wooden floors, dim lanterns, and a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. It stood at the edge of a sprawling forest, shrouded in mist even in daylight. The nearest neighbor was miles away. Jenny, the planner of the group, tried to keep the mood light. "Come on, guys. No cell service. No distractions. It's perfect." Ethan chuckled nervously, glancing at the shadowy forest. "Yeah, perfect place to get murdered." "Don't start," Sarah groaned, unpacking groceries. "It's just trees. Relax." Mike was silent, standing by the window. "Weird," he muttered. "What?" Jenny asked. He shook his head. "Thought I saw someone out there. Probably just the wind moving the trees." No one thought much of it, but as the sun set and darkness consumed Black Hollow, unease crept into the cabin like a cold draft. The first night passed uneventfully. The group played card games, drank cheap whiskey, and laughed until the fire burned low. They were preparing for bed when a loud knock echoed through the cabin. The friends froze. Mike grabbed a flashlight and headed to the door. "Probably a lost hiker," he said, trying to sound casual. When he opened the door, no one was there. The beam of his flashlight swept across the porch and the empty yard beyond. Just as he was about to close the door, he noticed it. A crude, hand-carved figurine lying on the porch. It was made of sticks and twine, shaped like a hunched figure with a hollowed-out face. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, holding it up. "Creepy," Sarah said, wrinkling her nose. "Some prank, maybe?" Jenny snatched it from his hand and tossed it outside. "It's nothing. Let's lock up and go to bed." But as they settled in for the night, strange noises began. A soft tapping on the windows, low whispers that seemed to drift through the walls. Ethan joked that the cabin must be haunted, but no one laughed. In the morning, they found more figurines scattered around the property. Some hung from the trees, swaying in the breeze. Others were placed carefully on the porch steps. Each one was different, but all had hollow faces. By the second day, the tension was palpable. Ethan, always the skeptic, insisted on exploring the woods to find out who was behind the prank. "You're not going alone," Jenny said. "I'll come with you." Mike and Sarah stayed behind, reluctant to venture into the forest. As Ethan and Jenny disappeared into the trees, the cabin felt impossibly quiet. The woods were dense, the towering trees blocking out most of the sunlight. As they walked, Jenny couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Ethan was ahead of her, pushing branches out of the way. "This is dumb," she muttered. "Who even lives out here? Probably some backwoods weirdo," Ethan replied. "Let's just find their campsite or whatever and head back." But there was no campsite, only more figurines, arranged in increasingly elaborate patterns. One formation stretched across the forest floor like a spiral, with dozens of figures pointing toward the center. "What the hell is this?" Ethan whispered. Jenny grabbed his arm, her voice shaking. "Let's go back." As they turned to leave, they heard it. A low, guttural sound, almost like laughter, coming from deeper in the forest. They ran, not stopping until the cabin came into view. That night, no one could sleep. The tapping returned, louder and more insistent. Mike sat by the fireplace with a poker in his hand, while Jenny and Sarah huddled on the couch. Ethan stood by the window, staring into the darkness. "They're out there," he said suddenly. "Who?" Jenny asked. "The people who made those things. I can see them." The others rushed to the window. At first, they saw nothing but shadows. Then, slowly, figures emerged, tall, gaunt shapes with glowing, hollow eyes. They stood motionless at the edge of the forest, watching the cabin. "Close the curtains," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "They're not moving," Ethan said, his face pale. "Why aren't they moving?" "They're waiting," Mike muttered, gripping the poker tighter. "For what? I don't know." At midnight, the knocking started again. It was louder this time, more deliberate. The friends huddled together, too afraid to answer. Then the front door creaked open. Mike sprang to his feet, but the room was empty. The figurines began to appear again, this time inside the cabin, on the kitchen table, the stairs, even the beds. The air grew heavy, the whispers louder. Jenny screamed as one of the figurines moved, its hollow face turning toward her. Ethan grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "They're coming," he said, his voice shaking. "We have to get out of here." The group fled into the woods, clutching flashlights and each other. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees twisting into unnatural shapes. The air was filled with laughter, whispers, and the rustling of unseen figures. "Which way?" Sarah cried. "I don't know," Ethan shouted. "Just keep moving." They stumbled onto a narrow path, its dirt lined with more figurines. The path seemed to stretch endlessly, the forest growing darker with every step. Behind them, the watchers followed. The path led them to a clearing, where a massive wooden effigy stood. It was shaped like a man, its hollow face staring down at them. Around its base, hundreds of figurines were arranged in a perfect circle. "We shouldn't be here," Jenny whispered. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The effigy's hollow eyes glowed, and the watchers stepped into the clearing, surrounding them. One by one, the friends were pulled into the circle. Sarah screamed as she vanished, her body dissolving into ash. Ethan tried to fight, but the watchers were too strong. Mike was dragged to the effigy, his face frozen in terror. Jenny was the last one standing. She fell to her knees, sobbing, as the watchers closed in. The effigy's voice echoed in her mind. "You have seen. Now you belong." When a search party finally arrived weeks later, they found the cabin empty. The only sign of the group was a circle of figurines in the clearing, each one bearing a hollow face. Locals whispered that the Watchers of Black Hollow had claimed more victims. They warned hikers to stay away from the forest, but some couldn't resist the lure of the unknown. And the Watchers waited, as they always had, for the next curious soul to wander too far. The lure of the hollow years later, a camper found a crude figurine at the edge of the woods. It was small, unassuming, with a hollow face. That night, he vanished, leaving behind nothing but his tent, and another figurine, placed carefully by the fire.
Thanks for listening to today's story. Let us know what you think. If you want to hear more scary stories, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode when we upload it. We'll always be here and welcome you.